Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And as I say to you every week, mate, welcome back to the couch to you too.
Mate, love being here every Thursday.
Yes.
Love it. Yeah.
How's your week?
Well, we've got one of the two we're going after in trade period, so I'm happy to welcome Mr. Kruger. It's no nightmare on Elm Street. I didn't understand what they were going with that, with the AFL's little sort of tagline there, but anyway, got my attention.
Got your attention.
Welcome aboard.
Freo will be busy as well, which is great. So see if we can get a few West Australians back home. Hey, congratulations to the Panthers as well, Ben. They obviously
got it done.
So for all our New South Wales and Queensland crew, hopefully that was a good result for you. For some of you, it may not be.
No.
But you apparently you're a South Sydney guy, Ben.
Well, I grew up. I grew up in Melbourne. I lived in Sydney, as you know, for 10 years, right? And so my house in Sydney was opposite where they used to train, the Rabbitohs. So I used to be able to go over there and watch them going through their paces and so forth. So from that point of view, I became, I had this connection to them. I'm obviously Melbourne, so Melbourne Storm's my team because they're more successable. Of course, I'll get on the bandwagon.
Let us know, Rabbitohs. Do you reject or accept Ben as a proxy last weekend? But anyway, I just want to tell you, I think we've got the greatest community in podcast history. I think our community is the best for a whole bunch of reasons, but I want to read this one out to you.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. Keen follower from Adelaide here. Love your work. Thank you, Ben. I do hope you won't think this is very rude. I couldn't help noticing the dark spot on the right side of your forehead in a Facebook video I've just watched. That's it. That's one. Unfortunately, the audio can't see that, but I can see Ben. Hope you've had it checked out. Not that I can see it clearly, but a quick Google of Ben Kingsley images shows me that it has gotten a lot darker. Now I sound like a completely weird stalker. However, we have a very strong family history of melanoma, and as a health professional myself, I regularly identify them on patients. Please excuse me for commenting on something that is none of my business. Kind regards and sincere thanks once again, Lucinda. Ben, we've got someone who cares about you enough to go and do a little bit of background search on your forehead. Now, it's not the first time it's come up, Ben. So
no.
The only reason I'm indulging this right now, because I know that you're cringing, you don't like any focus on you, let's get on with it, is just so that you can reassure the crew of what, Ben?
Yes, that I do get it checked out on a regular basis, and it is nothing to be concerned about, is what I've been told from the Sun clinic that I go to. And a shout out to Michael, who 12 months ago was also concerned about it. And I've had a bit of this, Bryce. I also had someone reach out to me when I was doing Fox sort of Sky News with Margaret about my Adam's apple. they thought that also could be a problem for cancer. Yeah. So all I'm saying is, for what fills me with the utmost of gratitude is that these people care enough about me that they're reaching out just to say, hey, just get that checked out. Now, one day in the future, you might see it gone. We have had some conversations about getting it surgically removed because it will keep growing. And so obviously from that point of view, I don't necessarily want it there indefinitely, but where it just hasn't been a priority in a pandemic. So sometimes you might see it go in the future. So just keep an eye out for that.
Lucinda, we do not think you are a weird stalker. We think you are someone who cares. And,
thank you.
And that has been just a symptom of why I think we have the greatest community in all of podcast, is because for someone to take out their own time to bring something like that up is remarkable.
Yes.
So
thank you, Lucinda, and thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone who's reached out to me.
You do have a big Adam's apple, though. But we've got a very, very special guest today, Ben. I'm looking forward to chatting with today's guest. But before we get there, my Mindset Minute theme today, I came across this. I thought it was a bit of fun. And as I'm now well and truly middle-aged, Ben, although I find that difficult to accept, but my birth certificate...
Well, you keep telling me you've got this really young-looking face, and I go, no, that was ages ago, mate, when you had a baby face. Not anymore.
Mate, have you ever got... Like, I challenge people to go back to our YouTube channel, the Property Couch YouTube channel, or the Empower Wealth YouTube channel,
you did have
and have a look at some of them, mate.
Then.
I was a baby in a suit, right? So it is a fact I have a baby face. But I do agree, since the pandemic's kicked in, I no longer have that baby face.
Since working with
well,
me.
I think our community can read between the lines, Ben. I didn't need to be that explicit, but yes, since working with you. So, because if you do, that's actually a good point. If you ever look at videos that I've shot, Ben, before I met you, I look very young and fresh, and there's no grey hair. And then since I've met you, wow, gone downhill quickly. So my mindset minute theme today is: when you're 20, you care about what everyone thinks.
Yep.
When you're 40, you stop caring about what everyone thinks. And here's the kicker for you and me, Ben, although you probably already know this. When you're 60, you realize no one was ever thinking about you in the first place. And that was a quote I found from Winston Churchill.
So true.
So when you're 60, you realize no one was ever thinking about you in the first place. There you go. Take that.
Very
so if you're in your 20s, that's coming. So the earlier you can realize that, the better. Hey, awesome guest today, Ben.
Yes.
Leah Calnan, President of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. We had a little chat with Leah earlier today. I think we should cut to that interview right now. All right, Ben, very special guest today. In fact, a returning guest to the Property Couch. We are chatting with Leah Calnan. She is the President of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria for the last couple of years. There's a bit of an update on that. We'll get that shortly. But she's also the sole director of Metro Property Management, and is considered one of the industry's most dedicated, accomplished and senior property management practitioners in this country. Welcome back to the Property Couch, Leah.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, I said that you're the president for the last couple of years, but there's a little update there.
Yes, my term finished on Monday, so that's all done now. 2 years is done.
Congratulations. I'm super keen to dive in on a couple of issues about your presidency, but before we do, Ben and I are on a mission to get people talking about money at the dinner table. So I want to ask you that question. What were money discussions like for you, Leah, when you were growing up across the dinner table? Were there any, or was it less said, more done?
Oh, look, it's always a controversial one. I think it's a bit like talking about politics and religion. So, but no, for us, I have a younger sister. We had part-time jobs. It was really important for us to learn the value of money. We would have to contribute to things that we wanted to buy. I remember having to contribute to, I think it might have been $3,000 or $5,000 to my first car. My sister did the same thing. And I think those values are probably now instilled. I've got 16-year-old twins, and, we're doing a lot of driving. Now we have to, they have to budget for contributing for their first car.
So, Leah, was there a lot of conversation? Like, how did your parents approach money? Was it open dialogue? Was it a closed house? How did all that work?
There was never a chat about, how much my parents earned. That was definitely very a private situation for them. But, I remember on a Thursday, it was very much around, my dad would come home. Obviously, they were paid weekly then. The bills were all divided up, or back then it was cash. All that cash was divided up. I remember on a Friday, part of my chore was to go down to the bank and put money into the different bank accounts that my mum had set up, whether it be my sister's account or mine, or to pay for bills. So there was a lot of conversation. I remember my mum and dad buying their first investment property, and you think back, wow, they must have been, so wealthy. But yeah, it was a conversation, but probably, I suppose times have changed now. We talk a little bit more about money with your kids.
And look, I love that story. I mean, we talk a lot about basically breaking up the pay packet into the different jars. So is that the sort of routine? So let's step ahead a little bit. You're now out on your own, you're renting for the first time, or you bought your first property. Did you have a similar type of banking structure in terms of organising your money, so departmentalising that money?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my mortgage was always first, had to be first.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you had your bills, you had a small amount that went towards savings, you had to balance council rates. You know, I had my first property when I was 20 in a relationship that, you know, didn't continue, but I kept the property. Yeah, but that was exactly, you know, working two jobs to be able to manage and support, and dividing everything up to yeah, goodness, you know, whereas now the kids think of it very differently.
One final question on that. Given that openness around, you know, the money being divided up into packets for banking and so forth, did you get a sense that we were comfortable around money and it didn't control us versus we were in control of it?
Yeah, I think so. You know, mum and dad were certainly not certainly, you know, borderline uncomfortable. That was for sure. But yeah, I think they were comfortable talking about it to a degree. It didn't control them, so it wasn't, you know, a week by week proposition. You know, we were fortunate to have those treats of, you know, the takeaways potentially once a week, or you know, all of the sporting activities that my sister and I did. But yeah, I would say, you know, looking back, it didn't control us. My mum was very structured with regards to the money. And I remember my dad often saying, you know, he was given his spending money for the week, which, you know.
A 7-day float, you beauty.
My husband sometimes says.
Yeah, great. Isn't it amazing? Yeah. Like, in terms of, it's the subtleness of that. But you know, so because you don't have deep thinking about that at a young age, but it's that subtleness of how you set up with money that allows that story to then just naturally progress, and it just becomes a thing in the background, and then you build up those behaviours. Excuse me, you're building up those behaviours. So that's a great story, right? And you've obviously built on that, buying your first property at 20. That's the type of behaviour that we want to see showing up more and more, and that's why we love having these chats.
Do you think that that's helped, Leah? Because, you know, you've clearly got parents who were very methodical and ordered around how their money. So I'm assuming that meant there wasn't a lot of evidence of stress, because it sounds like every major commitment got met before anything else. And then you get to 20 and you buy your first investment property, and you're seeing your parents buy an investment property. What was the mindset going through your mind at that point when you're trying to buy this first property? Was it you'd seen your parents do it, so therefore the evidence was there, so it was straightforward, or did you find that a difficult transaction to do, or somewhere in between?
Oh, good, great question. I think for them, it was a fairly easy and simple process. You know, they'd been married really young, so they'd had their savings for some time, you know, and I rented that property for a period of time as well. So, and part of the deal with that investment property that my mum and dad had, you know, we paid rent, you know, we paid market rent. And then I moved out and my sister moved in and she paid market rent. And I think that probably does instill those beliefs with you. I think also then for me to buy that first property, which was never meant to be an investment, you know, it was definitely supposed to be a you know, long-term, you know, home with my partner at the time. You know, it was a fairly simple and not scary process, because I'd had an understanding and probably lived at just a small amount through mum and dad's transactions of buying that unit.
And Leah, one final thing on this: did you budget? Or was it just the fact that you paid your mortgage first and then you set aside your bills, and then what was left over for you? Or tell me about that mindset. Or did you have an annual target for surplus that you were chasing?
Oh, no, not so much an annual target, but yeah, absolutely budget, you know, and I think it's something that is missing in society nowadays. It should be taught in the schools. But yeah, absolutely budget. You know, I was working in real estate, but also working at night in a sports centre. So, you know, that was my extra funds that I needed really in order to finish the house, because it was a new build. You know, there was no landscaping, you know, the driveway came last, all those sort of things. So that was, I suppose, whilst I didn't have a set target on the surplus, I knew I needed excess funds in order to finish the build, in order to, you know, make it, you know, more valuable.
Does that form part of your pitch when you're talking to landlords now, Leah, when you're trying to suggest that your property management business should look after it, where you say, hey, listen, I grew up when my parents even made me pay market rent, so I know the importance of getting maximum dollar for you and your investment.
Yeah, and board. I had to pay board and everything. Yeah, look, I think it does. I think if you can, the investment journey is a really complicated one and can be really stressful for some people. So if you've got some experience and understanding the challenges, often people presume that if you have 3 properties, you're wealthy. But the challenge often comes when in Victoria, council rates are all due, obviously quarterly. The first one comes in due at the end of September. So for those clients, they've really got 3, potentially 4 council rates all due. So it's those aspects that I think people forget about. And when you can relate to it and compare those stories with clients, particularly new clients, it certainly makes a big difference, I think.
It's often forgotten, isn't it? Some investors are asset rich, cash flow poor, and they've got to make sure that they can manage their money, and a good property manager can help them smooth that out as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, you mentioned you got 16-year-old twins. Just to round out this money across the dinner table discussion, how has that then flowed on from what we've just heard about your experience as a kid growing up? What are some of the things that you continue to flow through from when you were growing up, and what are some of the differences in the conversations you're having with your 16-year-olds?
Look, it's certainly really highlighting the fact that, they need to work for their money. So, if they're able to, they did a part-time job this year, obviously being 16, they're very dedicated with their schooling, but they play a lot of sport. So they did boundary umpiring for football, so they started to see this money come through. They started to see their monthly statement come in. So that really instilled in them that if they did X amount of games, they could earn X amount of money, which was great. And in fact, I've got 3 boys and they're all negotiating at the moment. They want a PS4 and they all want to contribute to it because I've said, mum and dad aren't paying for it, but if you guys want it, that's fine. You all need to contribute. But don't forget, you're 16, you've got to pay for a contribution to your car. So think about that as well.
Terrific. Now, I hinted at the top that you've been president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria for some time. You just announced that that was up until Monday, just gone. During your time as president, there was a pandemic. There was an introduction of updated Rental Tenancies Act. There was rise of real estate prices, particularly across regional as well, which was not so common prior to that. You had the metro versus the regional lockdown. So metro agents being different to regional agents and all the crossovers and all the stuff that came with that. There was a couple of texts you received from me. What about this? Can you help clarify with that? Yep. And then personally, you were homeschooling and you were trying to run which is a very successful business in Melbourne. Was Monday a welcome sigh of relief for you?
When you lay it all out like that, I think now I know why I'm tired. Yeah, look, I'm sad in one way because, I think for me, I get that momentum going and I can just, I can achieve amazing things with my momentum. I'm super proud of everything that I've achieved, but I'm also at that time where I went, you know what, I've done what I needed to do. This was my job. I needed to get the industry through this pandemic, and I have. I've got those one-on-one inspections back with the, strong assistance from the CEO of the REIV, and that was kind of my final. I've done my bit now. Time to hand over the reins. Yeah.
Well done. I can't think of any other president that would have had to endure some of those things coming from left field. There's probably been plenty of presidents that have had stuff come along the way, but just the repetition and the constant next. So one of those things that you oversaw was the changes to the Residential Tenancies Act with a significant number of changes. Given that you are prominent in the property management space, what have been your observations on the changes with respect to what have you observed that are the winners, whereas tick every day of the week that's positive, and what's your observation of the not so winners or the losers where you think that hasn't worked in practice?
Yeah, look, it's been certainly a large challenge in the investment space, and we always knew that the state government was a driving factor for one of their key election promises. Advantages, certainly it's definitely more weighted towards a tenant. Unfortunately, it really needed to be rounded and more balanced legislation. I think, some of the, there's really those consequences that have come from it, and we've been saying it for some time. The consequences will be that it's no longer attractive for a period of time for people to own property in Victoria, and they'll exit. And, we've been seeing that for the last, 9-10 months now. And particularly as prices grew and continue to grow in Victoria, those sort of things are certainly more attractive for the investor to exit. The compliance aspect is enormous. There's additional costs for business owners, for property managers, there's additional costs for owners. There were some things that have been tidied up. But I think when you blend the pandemic, you blend the delays with VCAT, there's not a lot of positives still in this space at the moment. I think that will change. I think as we get through the pandemic, as we see the investment market change, because it will change as different people come back in, as certain investors leave and probably shouldn't really have been in that space for a while anyway. But I think one of the key aspects is that it's really put property management on the map. It's created property management as a career. And now after nearly 30 years of being a PM, I no longer get asked, when am I moving into sales? I've clearly established my career as a property manager. So I think there's been positives there. But, it's a challenging space for legislation and for owners at the moment.
Leah, I've got a couple of questions in this space around, if you were in charge, what would be the sort of one or two pieces of legislation would you repeal? What would be the ones that you would take back because they just don't make sense?
Look, for one of mine was definitely pets, and I'm a big pet owner. I have, a menagerie in my own place. So, but it really should be the owner's decision, it shouldn't be the way it's been documented that a tenant makes a request and the owner has to demand that, no, it's not going to be approved, and to actually defend their case. So that would be one. I think with regards to, the ending of tenancies, part of that new legislation changes, they removed the 120-day no reason notice. And sometimes there are no reasons or nothing that actually fits into the box of legislation on why an owner wants their property back. That would certainly be one that really needs to come back, because it does really limit flexibility, and it prevents owners from really being able to plan long-term with tenants, because they can't necessarily get out of a relationship there. They're probably my two.
Yeah, they're the ones that have always been, certainly the 120 no reason clause is the big one for me. So we know the intended consequences, and we also, you just mentioned them before, investors are going to get out of Melbourne and Victoria. As the, new immigration and new immigrants arrive, there's going to be a huge demand for rental property. Rents are going to increase, unfortunately, for tenants. That is going to be a thing. But as you said, the unintended consequences are also relating to VCAT. Tell us the mess that is VCAT at the moment, because it's bordering on disgraceful, really, in terms of, so how long does it take to actually, put a claim up and get through the whole VCAT process? Because this is the piece that people miss out on. Like, when you're having a difficult time with your tenant, the only place you can go to get a resolution is through the tribunal. Tell us how bad it is.
Yeah, it's not good. It sits at about 10 weeks for an application for a non-payment of rent at the moment. And that's in the current legislation. There's a whole lot of backlog for applications which were made, if we go back to as late or early as March 2020, applications for bonds and compensation claims, they haven't been heard, and they're probably not going to be listed this year. VCAT just don't have the resources. And things have been delayed because we've moved to a telephone service. But by introducing the telephone service, on one hand, you're allowing and introducing tenants to the process, which is great. It's something that VCAT and I think the industry as a whole really wanted both parties always to come together. But it's delayed a number of hearings that can be heard every day. So instead of there being maybe 20 hearings a day per member, it's been reduced to 15. And all whilst they're adding, substantial increase in number of applications flowing through every single day. So that backlog, I would anticipate, probably still 12 months. And that is those unintended consequences of it, because it does make it less attractive for investors. It makes people, a bit like our lockdown restrictions in Victoria, it makes people just make a decision not to follow the rules and to go outside, what they should be doing and make up their own processes in order to get the outcome they need.
And my final one, because there you go. That's where I get my frustrations as well as the chair of PICA. My final one is around the whole idea of selecting the tenant now. As you say, with a 120 no reason clause, this selection process, is it getting more and more difficult? Are landlords more and more particular about the type of tenant that they're looking to get into the property?
Yeah, the selection process has to change moving forward, because again, one of those new legislation changes is that you can't end a tenancy after the initial fixed term. So really, and I've been saying this to property managers now for over 12 months, you've got to perform manage your tenant by about the third month, and you're looking and determining by month 3, month 4, month 5, getting to month 6 where you've been able to establish 6 months of rental history, but you've also been able to potentially do a routine inspection, whether it be virtual or physical. Because really by the time you get to month 8, you have to make that decision if you're going to keep that tenant. Because if you are on the border, I always say, let them go, end the tenancy, because if you're sitting there in that umming and ahhing position and it clicks over, you can't get them out if things go pear-shaped, unless you sell or move in or fit within those, small parameters of being able to end those tenancies. So there's a lot more administration work involved from a PM. There's a lot more difficult conversations needing to be had with owners, because the costs also increase for them. If you're not happy with that performance of that tenant, you're going to have to end that tenancy, and then there's another letting fee. So it's a balancing act there.
And sorry, I'll just jump in for one last one. Has that led to more longer first term tenancy requests, like 15 months, 18 months, or are we still sitting at the traditional 12 months?
Yeah, there's still a debate at the moment, and I've talked to the industry over the last 12 months on that, because if you did do a slightly longer lease, you'd be able to potentially do 2 routine inspections. The challenge, though, in the current pandemic is you're doing virtual inspections, and you know what? I could show you my house looks amazing in this room, but you wouldn't see that my bed behind me is not made. So I could frame the information that you see at that time in order to really demonstrate that I might be amazing, but actually behind the scenes I'm not, for example. So it does come with those challenges. So I think at the moment I'd be really recommending just stick to those 12-month leases, but you've got to have those really challenging and honest conversations with your property manager. And from the landlord point of view, or the RRP that they're now called, you have to hear what your property manager's saying, because gut feeling and their experience goes a long way over and above what's written on paper.
Some great advice.
Leah, you referenced lockdown there, and obviously the Melbourne population in particular is the most lockdown population in the world, and so that provided a bunch of challenges for the basic need of shelter, rent, buying and selling. The campaign you led with the REIV around lockdown and locked out campaign in the Herald Sun. And the headline was part of that was a full page ad in the Herald Sun with a picture of Dan Andrews, and it was like Victorians being denied their basic right to rent, buy and sell a home. Things are bad enough. Mr. Premier, please give us our keys back. private inspections can be done safely. What can you tell us about that campaign? And it was clearly effective. What was it like behind the scenes getting that up and running, and then the result? We talked last week about part of the result, but what can you share about what happened behind the scenes?
Behind the scenes was really interesting. There was a lot of umming and ahhing, really around whether the Premier's image should or shouldn't be used. It was probably a 50-50 split. I remember, it was due to go live in the paper on the Wednesday. It had already been signed off on. And I remember saying to my husband that night, I said, this is going to go one or two ways. It's either going to be amazing, we're going to get this back, or, oh my God, how am I going to ever recover from this? And he reminded me that, nobody can blame you for not trying. So I think that gave me a little bit of comfort, although I didn't eat or drink for about 24 hours, in the lead up to, to that Wednesday morning.
Because to set the scene, it was a full page image of the Premier, and it wasn't the most complimentary image. And then it was, locked down and locked out. Give us the keys back. It was I thought it was effective, and I'm sure you got their attention.
Yeah, well, we certainly did, and those one-on-one inspections have been able to resume, which has been fantastic. Because all those one-on-one inspections could and had been done safely for a long time, and one of the challenges I think with the Victorian government is that a lot of the decisions or the policies that they introduce, they contradict something else. So it's not safe to do a one-on-one inspection, but it's safe for me to go to Woolworths and spend an hour there with another 250 people in the one confined space, which again just doesn't make sense. So we really tried to leverage off that component, but also remind that housing is shelter and it is a necessity, and without looking at the financial aspect as well, because we know the property sector contributes about 46% of the income to the government. So it was pleasing. I do feel like that was my final curtain or final hurrah, that I was able to say, yep, great. And it was across all sectors of property. It wasn't just residential sales. It was leasing in the resi space, but also commercial, which was really important as well.
What were some of the stories that you were seeing in the lead up to that? Because obviously that was the pressure point and then it got released. But what were some of the things that our listeners wouldn't really have understood unless they're in the industry that was happening as a result of the lockdown? What were some anecdotes you were seeing where people were under stress because they couldn't facilitate basic transactions in basic shelter?
Well, simple things like somebody had already sold their property and had a 60-day settlement, and they had to make a commercial decision to view a property online, and property is one of those things. You need to feel it, you need to smell it, you need to see it. Virtual is great. It does allow us to be able to get an idea, but it doesn't give us the whole full experience of purchasing property. So those stories, and because my mobile number is so widely known now, every day I was getting calls from vendors like that. We were then hearing stories where desperate purchasers were knocking on doors of vendors and saying, I know your property's for sale with X, but I'm desperate, tell me what you want and I'll pay it. So, we completely lost the ability for it to be transacted in a COVID safe manner. You also had people in domestic violence situations who just couldn't view properties. We were hearing stories of people who had separated during the pandemic or during this lockdown 6 and living in different parts of the house because they couldn't get out either way. So, and I think with me, for me, it resonates because not only as a mum, but also, as a property manager, have this DNA that you want to try and help everyone. And, we had to find a solution to try and help everyone.
So, Leah, what's actually opened up again? We've got inspections happening. There's view to purchase, pre-settlement inspections.
Yeah.
Take us through some of the sort of changes.
From the perspective of the buyers, what's the change for the buyers?
Yeah, so now a buyer they can go outside their kilometre radius and they can physically view those properties. There's still some clarification being sought whether or not a Melbourne buyer can go to a regional purchase, but a regional buyer can come into Melbourne because of the different lockdown restrictions. They can complete their final inspection, they can complete their pest and building inspection, their valuations. And one of the last things that was introduced about 2 weeks ago, for those that are needing to sell, wanting to sell, needing to rent, wanting to rent, photographers are back, stylists are back. So they are able to go in and facilitate the commencement of those campaigns so that people can put their properties on the market and obviously buyers can start to go through.
What's been the biggest change for the agents? Because they can have an auction, but with 10 registered bidders, I'd be thinking local Victorian agents would be stoked with that because they don't have a registration process. Whereas now they'd be seeing that as a positive, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so, again, the pandemic's really demonstrated that Victoria needs to have a registration process for auctions. So, that's certainly been flagged with government multiple times now. So if you're in the lockdown metro area, auctions are only online. If you are in the regional area, auctions are up to 10 people can participate, or it's still got that hybrid approach, and that hybrid approach will continue. I wouldn't be surprised, even as I think our numbers today are sitting at about 1,600 and something. I'd be certainly encouraging people to remain with those online auctions rather than taking them to the street, although auctioneers probably won't agree with me because we know how much they love the theatrics around it.
Come on.
But from an ability of trying to herd everyone and cross-check, and we're now dealing with the potential mandatory vaccination registration, all those sort of things, it's probably easier to leave it online for this period.
What about online? What was your observations? Because clearly, at first people slow to take up, and then it becomes the norm. What are some of the things that you observed from the perspective of the institute with online auctions? Was there any complaints? Was there any sort of hidden things that people hadn't thought about with the auction process, or by and large it was adopted and went through reasonably smoothly?
It adopted really quickly, and I'm often being quoted to say, the industry is a bit like the Titanic. It doesn't like to move and change real quickly. But I remember, when the first lockdown was sort of brewing, I went out to an agency in Croydon and actually sat in their room and watched these online auctions. So it gave me comfort on how easy it could actually just happen. It also allowed for those people that were potentially, concerned. They could obviously just bid from home. I think there's been some practical challenges around it, just with regards to the rules, making sure that you've got cameras on, making sure that everyone that is wanting to participate, you can clearly hear them. So I think they've learnt over the last 18 months. There's their process today is certainly far sharper than it was 18 months ago. But it also does demonstrate that, the industry can pivot, it can adjust, and technology is no longer something that they are also scared of. It actually works really well working alongside them. And if they utilise it well, they even makes them, gives them the ability to showcase their skills even better.
So Leah, in terms of, given we don't have open for inspections, the general open houses, and this is the new approach 1-to-1, can you take us through the process of how the agents keep the potential buyers safe, and what's the sort of run through?
Yeah, so private inspections now are one-on-one, one per household can attend. The agent needs to remain outside, which is also an area that we've challenged government on because we are concerned about safety, security, and also some COVID safe measures as well. The agent should be, when they first get to the property, obviously wiping down any surfaces and opening or anything that a prospective buyer or renter might want to have a look at, so cupboards, potentially the oven, the pantry door, those sort of things. And then after that buyer has gone through, they have to have registered. They can't just turn up. There's no advertised inspection times. The agent would go in and they would wipe those surfaces down. And that's the challenge at the moment. We don't know what they're touching. So, we have to assume that they've touched everything. So they therefore need to wipe down everything, all those surfaces. It's really important that the agent doesn't have a queue of people in the street. So keeping people in their cars is one of the suggestions. Give them a number, say you can come in at 11:30. The next one comes in at 11:45, for example. But it is working well. Again, if you ask agents, they'd much prefer the open for inspections. I get that, but
something's better than nothing.
That's right. And they're very, when I say we're very privileged to be able to be still operating, in these times. So we need to make sure that we're following all of the rules completely.
But for clarity, if someone's in, you're not quite sure yet if someone's in Melbourne to regional, are you? But if you interpret it, if someone leaves Melbourne, they go to regional, they have 3 or 4 private inspections lined up. As long as they don't go to a cafe or anything other than probably a public restroom, potentially that would be okay. It's probably easier to answer it if it's from regional going into Melbourne. Like go to the inspections, don't go to any cafes, go straight out. But you're saying if we reverse that, because I obviously live in regional Vic, if someone was coming from Melbourne out to check out a property in Torquay, it's still a bit unclear if they can do that. Is that right? Yeah.
So the directions say that they can't, but actually currently on the government's website, it says they can. Ooh. So surprise. Welcome to my 2 years of presidency.
That'll be the first time, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, it's about the 200th time.
Well, we remember we had a case in Byron Bay where the guy out of Sydney took his family up to Byron Bay and said he was going to inspect a property. He was buying property. So that's the case where, again, 1% of the population do the wrong thing and it affects everybody else. And obviously the optics don't look great for the politicians. So what do you think they do? They just stop you from doing it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And even from an agent, they can go in, they can travel from metro to regional and do their jobs and complete those inspections. But just as you were saying, Bryce, you've had to remind people, you can't go to a cafe, don't stop at the 7-Eleven, potentially don't get fuel, because you are potentially putting yourself at risk, and again, unintended consequences of your team. Mm-hmm. That you come back and all of a sudden you take your whole team out for 14 days.
Yeah. So as we sort of start to open up again, what do you see? Do you anticipate there's a Super Saturday between now and Christmas, or do we think that with the way that we're opening up, we won't get that 1,000+ auction on a Saturday?
No, I think we do. I think our numbers, if I go back to the last weekend, we're sitting about 800 due to go to auction. So I think we will certainly see those Super Saturdays return. This year, the take-ups, it's been a really mixed bag, because not every area across particularly Metro has been running at the same pace. Whereas this time last year, once we came out of whatever that lockdown number was, it just went bang across Metro, and regional went to a whole new level. So I think we will see those Super Saturdays return. We'll still see a lot of similar processes that we saw last year, that inspections and auctions will take place right up until Christmas Eve. And agents will no doubt return early in the 2022 again, because of the stock numbers that we're still starting to see filter through. And agents need to be really strategic with their clients. If they've got something that's ready to go now, then they should potentially put it on now versus waiting for 4 weeks time. We've even talked across the industry about potentially reducing your auction campaigns, changing it from that 4 to 5 weeks to bring it back to maybe a 3-week. And also changing your campaigns from just being an auction on a Saturday, maybe move it to a Wednesday, so you create a level of point of difference for your client's property.
And Leah, we've seen the the government announced mandatory vaccinations for estate agents. What's that program look like in terms of timeframes and the like as part of that reopening?
Well, I do know when that first happened, I did say, thank goodness I won't be president in that, the coming month, because that was going to be an interesting one to navigate. The Institute's certainly not been in favour of mandatory vaccination. Everyone should be able to have their own choice. But there's still, again, a grey area. It's not up on any of the DHHS websites. We're not getting really clear clarification. It's one of the other questions, or I think there were 4 or 5 we sent through to government on Monday. Still Thursday now, and we haven't had any answers. But that will be a really tricky one. How are you going to navigate it? Is it going to be law? Teams are probably going to be a little bit easier to manage, but then if you think about an auction in a high performing suburb or even regional Victorian, you've got 100 people there, and yes, it might be outdoors, but how are you going to cross check that everyone's double vaxxed? So there's a lot of logistics around it, which often I think with any policy through the pandemic, government hasn't had enough consultation with the stakeholders to see what those consequences are or how you implement it practically. They just go, here's what we suggest, and then we go, well, that doesn't work, that's not going to work either.
So we've got a bit of a watch and see there. Okay. Yep, understood. Yep.
In the spirit of you handing over the presidency on Monday, if we do a little pivot, you are a fabulous property manager in the state of Victoria, and it'd be remiss of us not to ask you for some tips for property investors anywhere in the country, because you're a property investor yourself, but largely around what's some of the 1 or 2 tips that people can think about, given the legislation changes that you talked about. You hinted at one before around the pets and the no reason clause. But is there anything else that you think that you could share your 30 years of wisdom for our community who are hungry property investors around what they should be thinking about as a property investor in Victoria?
Look, there's definitely a couple. Marketing, you have to spend some money on marketing. No longer can you just rely, or you can't have the property manager take the photos. You have to pay for professional photos, spend the money and have virtually staged images, particularly in the apartment market. You need to show a point of difference there. Look at the different types of floor plans, whether it be a 3D option as well. You've got to create some chatter around your property. And again, if you're in the apartment market within those 0 to 10 Ks from the CBD in Melbourne at the moment, it's really easy to stand out because there's a lot of really bad advertised apartments at the moment because they've been sat and they've forgotten. So think about that. We've been saying it for years around property managers. There is a churn, and I get it. There's been a greater churn in pandemic times than ever before. We've lost about 30% of the industry. But you've got to find a property manager and stick with them, build that relationship, understand what they're saying. It's not necessarily that they agree with the legislation. They're just trying to guide you to the best outcome you could potentially get. And one of my tips, I suppose I've been doing this for a long time, I've got a few clients still do it at the moment, is, create a buffer. So if you're going to have a change of tenants in 12 months time, 18 months time, put some money away every month, even if it means the agent takes the money out and leaves it in their trust account, because those $2,000 or $3,000 that will go towards the repaint, recarpet, it's a lot easier for me to then say, hey, Bryce, remember we've put this maintenance fund for you, and, the tenants give a notice, but we've got $3,500 here. We're just about ready to get all these works done now. So those sort of things, it just comes with the experience as well.
Really good tip. My last one for you on that line of thinking is, what are you saying to anyone now who says, I want to self-manage it myself versus a property manager? Clearly you're of the view to not do that, but what would be some of the reasons that you would give right now why you wouldn't consider self-managing?
Look at
I've just given you a can of worms.
Potentially not laughing too much at them. Yeah. If I'm one of the most experienced respected property managers in the state, the country, and I don't self-manage, why would anyone else?
Success leaves clues, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Success
Yeah.
leaves clues.
Yeah,
All right.
don't do it.
Don't do it. There's not
Yeah,
enough time left for us
you-
to give every bullet point, but just don't do it. It's
You don't have enough drama in your life. That would be my first. That would be my first. Oh, you want to self-manage? Oh, you don't have enough drama in your life. Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, this will
go
bring
bungee
it.
jumping.
Yeah. Did you like your hair? Yeah.
Oh, it's going
Yeah.
great. Nice. Hey, the last one for me, Leah, is I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it. What are you most proud of during your time as president? And also, what is the message to Adam Docking as you handed over the keys to the office on Monday?
Look, if I look at all the achievements, like there's been an amazing amount of achievements, and I'm super proud of those. I think one of the most proud moment for me is changing the perception of the REIV and being able to give it more personality and to allow people to be far more connected with it. And I've done that in, really different ways. I did lots and lots of videos, and often the videos had, a child in the background, an animal in the background. There was always something going on, and they were never planned, but it created, people got to know me. And I think that made a really big difference. They felt supported. They felt that they could pick up the phone and maybe never have spoken to me before, but build a relationship with me. So I think that's been a really big change. And Gil's done the same. He's not a public person, but he and I have worked really hard to create personality in that space. And I think for my tips for Adam is, you've got to continue to do that. Real estate is bricks and mortar, but it's far more about people, and people need to be connected to the leaders of any institution, any association, any government. And I think we've seen that with Gladys. Everyone's devastated with Gladys leaving and moving on. I'm not sure people would feel the same with Dan. So, different leadership styles, see different ways that people connect with them.
Well, I think it's that positive nature. I mean, Leah, we can say to you that you leave the association in a far better situation than when you first get there. And I think that's testimony to the contribution that you've made, right? I mean, when you come in there, do the work that you do. So congratulations to you, and thank you for steering us through what has been, a very tumultuous time in that sort of space. So again, credit to you and congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on, Leah. You've swung by the couch on a number of occasions during your presidency. We look forward to you swinging by the couch in the future without that hat on, and continuing to add value to the industry through your role as a property manager and an influencer through the legacy of what you've done for the last 2 years. So on behalf of Ben and I and everyone here in our community, thanks for swinging by the couch today. Mate, how good is it to get Leah on? Geez, I enjoy chatting with her.
Look, she's a wealth of knowledge, and we always like to get our experts on the panel and on the show, on the couch, with a wealth of knowledge. And you've got some serious takeaways about what you need to consider in terms of buying property in Victoria. You've got someone who's a championing of the real estate industry, which we're a part of. So I can't speak highly enough of Leah. She's done a great job in her 2 years as the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, and we thank her.
Broken through some glass ceilings. It was traditionally a boys' club, made it more fun, made it more approachable, all that sort of stuff that she can just well and truly put her head on the pillow and say she's done a great job. So thanks, Leah. There was a couple of internet challenges there. Just thanks for persevering with those, crew. It's clearly we could hear everything, but there was a couple of things to think about. But Leah, we thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure having you on. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is just a simple reminder about how to measure your wealth. So picture you've got two people. Call one Sarah and one Kylie. And Sarah's saved $200,000 and Kylie saved $1 million. Think, good work, Kylie. Well done. But then
amazing.
you go down to the expenses column and you realize that Sarah spends $4,000 a month, but Kylie spends $100,000 a month. So therefore, if you do the maths, Ben, Sarah's wealth is 4 years and 2 months, whereas Kylie's wealth is 10 months. So I just wanted to reinforce it, because passive income is the nirvana, right? So imagine if Kylie, if Sarah, instead of having 200,000 in savings, she just had $4,000 in passive income and $4,000 in monthly expenses. That's true financial freedom. Whereas if Kylie had $4,000 in passive income, would be well and truly in the red. So it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep and for how long. So my question to everyone who's listening to this, why don't you go and work out how wealthy you are and measure it in time, not dollars? Because if you can measure it in time, and Ben, if it becomes a little infinite symbol, that is the true goal. Go back to episode 350, listen to your story. That's the passive income being greater than your expenses is it. So my life hack today is go and measure your wealth, but measure it in terms of time, not in terms of dollars in the bank.
And Kylie, can you stop having champagne baths if you're spending $100,000 a month? But I love the example. It rings so true.
Ben, what's making property news?
Hey, big news, obviously. Following the economic update that we did earlier in the week, we've now got some confirmation of the first scalpel cut in regards to Macroprudential. And that scalpel has landed on what we call the buffer rate, Bryce. So effectively what you've got is you've got a floor rate and then you've got a buffer rate. So basically APRA says to the banks, when you're doing serviceability assessments, that they want you to have a floor rate, which is really your sort of marketed rate. And then there's a buffer. Now the buffer is important because it means that if interest rates go up, that the borrower will be able to service that loan with that change. Now they've moved that buffer rate from 2.5 added to the floor rate to 3. So it effectively means that you'll lose around 5% of your borrowing power. And this is, again, a scalpel to a sensitive issue because they don't want to stop the economic recovery as we come out of it or learn to live with COVID. So this is the first step in the dance. Now, they may not be just one and done. So the other important news that we got from Wayne Byers was around this idea. He's the chairman of APRA, is that he's going to be releasing a paper before the end of the year talking about some of the other potential instruments or levers that they may be able to pull. Now, I talked about the one that was getting a lot of media attention on the Tuesday update, and that was around debt to income ratio and 6 times of debt to income in terms of they're starting to see a trend in that area. But what was interesting in that, if we're wearing our investor hats on, is that they're also looking at potential other instruments for investors. So I'm keen to see what that looks like in terms of whether they're going to try and also massage the amount of investor demand that we're seeing in the market. So that is the big news story coming out of this space, Bryce.
It is, Ben. So it was flagged as coming. We knew it was coming next year, but clearly part of it is to let people put people on notice, and hopefully some of that does some of the heavy lifting. But it'd be fair to say that there is definitely more to come. So
yeah, and if you put an example there, you're sort of talking about borrowing $600,000. That will now be maximum borrowing power of around 570. So again, just a subtle difference, but it's also flagging to borrowers that don't overstretch yourself. You know, we're talking about the financial system and the security and integrity of the financial system. And so this is the first move, which, you know, a lot of commentators are saying it's probably not going to do too much for demand, but it's basically signaling to the market, as is this paper that's going to be coming out, rather than surprising the market where you get a shock of confidence. This is basically a nice way. So I'm very happy with what Wayne Byers is doing in regards to this approach, because I think it's sort of saying that we understand the sensitivities here, but we also we want to make sure that we've got a sustainable property market with sustainable values and price points over time. So I'm congratulating them on the sensible approach so far. It's just what they're going to do next with investors. We'll get it up that paper first in terms of some of the options. So I think that's the right approach, signalling to the market. So well done to the regulators at this stage.
And do you think it's a shift in the short term away to non-ADI institutions because they don't similarly have APRA? So if all the people under the APRA umbrella have all, but then we go over to non-ADI taking. So will the market, in your mind, shift their short term?
Not with this minor adjustment. They won't necessarily. I think what APRA is also saying, even though ADIs, which is basically authorised deposit-taking institutions, which is effectively the banks and people who take deposits, well, that's one part of the lending market. There are also other lenders who play in this space that don't report under that regime. But APRA are basically saying to them, you are going to be reporting to us. So there will be some requirements in terms of providing us with some of that data. And we also saw in the note released out and the commentary from Wayne that he's saying it's so immaterial in terms of the size of the market they impact that it won't have a significant enough or systemic effect on the broader market. So even if it moves with 3 or 5% of people going to these second tier and third tier lenders, it's not going to have a risk to the financial system. And so that's his approach. So what it does mean, and again, what we've always said as part of, if you're working with an investment savvy mortgage broker, is that you will, if you're sensible and you've done your cash flow modeling and you're doing all the right things around making sure you've got those appropriate buffers, having a 6 times multiple isn't dangerous if you know what you're doing. It's dangerous if you've got other costs that are coming into the household, like starting a family or going down to single incomes or job security is not there. We would not recommend you would go anywhere near that 6 times multiple. But in certain cases, if you're, say, you're starting out as a first year doctor and your income's going to grow substantially, taking on that ratio is actually not difficult because your income's going to basically outpace the servicing that you do. So Bryce has talked about this before. When you're dealing with an investment savvy mortgage broker, you're talking about being 1 or 2 steps ahead. And for most sophisticated borrowers, that is about looking at all of your options on the table, not just looking at your mainstream lenders, but also having a combination or a blend of those is going to be an important part of that. So good question, Bryce.
Very well. Good update, Ben. So jam-packed episode. Thanks again to Leah for joining us. Thanks to you for your contribution as always, Ben. And until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
See you next week, folks.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. To thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.